During the time period of mid to late 80s, newly created organizations like ACT UP and Gay Men's Health Crisis started to take a definite stand against how AIDS victims were treated. Strong criticism of Mayor Koch's efforts and public demonstration against President Reagan finally started to get the attention of policymakers.
That's why the gay community in places like San Francisco and New York, which had essentially organized around sex in the 70s and had a politics because it was being attacked by the right, transformed itself in the 80s as a consequence of this epidemic into a community that was both politically sophisticated and created agencies, its own social agencies to deal with the illness, with welfare issues, with housing issues, with insurance issues. It reconstructed itself, and there were a lot of wealthy and middle-class gay men who knew how to use the press, and the gay community, took ownership of this epidemic, and through Gay Men's Health Crisis and ACT UP and organizations like that, forced AIDS to become a national issue.
Today, at a time where AIDS no longer means death because of advanced treatment, we have come to think of the AIDS crisis of the 80s as something of the past, something that happened and cannot be remembered.
Historically, in the 80s, there was a lot of resistance. I think that's just kind of a critical term to the epidemic in all kinds of ways. People just, at each stage, didn't want to believe what they were seeing.
The consequences of the AIDS epidemic are all around us. AIDS not only threatens homosexuals and drug addicts, but also heterosexuals as well. New York City residents are fighting to get Mayor Bloomberg to stop cuts against housing for AIDS victims. Many people are struggling with the daily trials and financial burdens of this devastating disease. Unfortunately, it would seem that the concern for victims of AIDS, a disease that once wreaked havoc on the country's social order, has diminished, and thus continues to weaken at an alarming rate at the expense of countless victims of circumstance.
Losing their strength and form, 60-year man on 20-year-old skin. Peace, peace.